This is the Made for Success podcast, and this is Chris Widener, speaker and author of over 15 books, including the New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestseller, The Angel Inside. The Made for Success podcast will help you turn your potential into performance, succeed in every area of your life, and achieve your dreams. And now, enjoy the show.
Our guest today is John Connors. John is a partner at Ignition Partners, LLC, investing principally in enterprise and business software. Prior to joining Ignition, John spent 16 years with Microsoft in various strategic roles, including Senior Vice President of Finance and Administration and Chief Financial Officer from January 2000 to April 2005. In this role, John was responsible for managing the global finance function as well as corporate services, procurement, real estate, and the company's global operations and technology group. John is also a member of the board of directors of Nike, Jobster, and Certus corporations. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, good to have you here. I've heard so many good things about you over the short period of time that I've been aware of you and the different things. We kind of travel in some of the similar circles.
Absolutely.
So it's fun to finally get a chance to sit down with you.
Well, it's an honor to be here, and hopefully I'll do a good job.
Yeah, I'm sure you will.
Yeah.
So I have, first big question has got to be, how does a guy go from being born in Miles City, Montana, to being in charge of the finances and various and sundry other things at Microsoft, one of the largest corporations in the world?
Well, just 1 year at a time.
Right.
You know, I think I've been asked that before, and I actually think the upbringing I had in southeastern Montana was almost ideal for being a business person. I grew up in a town called Miles City, which is the cow capital of the West. Yeah. If you've ever read the book Lonesome Dove, it's the end destination of Lonesome Dove, so it's the cow capital of the West. Still has a cattle sale every Tuesday.
Huh.
And I grew up in a family of 7 kids. My dad and mom had a great relationship, and my dad was a very successful high school teacher and football and basketball coach.
Oh.
So from an early age, my brother and I would go to his practices, ride on the bus, go to the games, and he was a great role model for how to lead and how to inspire and how to motivate people. He was a great example of what a great leader is like. Then in addition to that, from the time I was a little kid, I was a voracious reader. And the public library, I'd sometimes check out 10 or 12 books when I was in the 3rd and 4th grade.
Wow.
So I always was curious about places, people, and things. Then I participated in sports heavily, and whether it was football, basketball, or baseball, learned a lot about being part of a team, setting goals, working hard, and being a leader of a team, what that responsibility meant. I worked on ranches, I worked on farms, I worked on oil rigs, I worked for the Burlington Northern Railroad as a laborer, and really learned to appreciate what hard work at sometimes low wages means, but you still take your bucket to work every day and you do your very best job. I went to the University of Montana, which is one of the great universities in the Rocky Mountain region. It's a real jewel, and it happens to have an extraordinarily good accounting program. I started out in pre-law, and they suggest you take some accounting at almost any law school you want to go to. I took an accounting class, and it was very, very competitive, and it just fit as a major. As I got done with that major, I decided I didn't want to go to law school. I wanted to work, and I got an offer from Deloitte Haskins & Sells in Seattle. Moved here in 1984, and that was a great experience. In a lot of ways, working for one of the big accounting firms is an on-the-job MBA.
What were you doing there?
I was in the audit staff.
Okay.
And so I worked on a series of clients in the couple of years, and one of the clients I worked on was a company called Safeco. Well, it turned out the guy that was the controller at Safeco, he later became CFO and then president of Safeco, was a ex-Montana guy who'd gone to the University of Montana and had worked at Deloitte as a partner. I got hired at Safeco in 1986, and that was a great learning experience. I worked on a broad range of things, everything from special projects to SEC-related work, and finally got put on a project associated with an acquisition of a company they'd acquired in California, or that they had sold in California, called Safeco Title, and I was a junior staff person working on a lot of the diligence work, and then the post-sale closing the deal. The person from there that was the CFO of that division left when the deal was done, and he became CFO of a company called Pitt Printing. He hired me to go to Los Angeles to work at Pitt Printing. It was a publicly traded company. It was about a 70% pay raise from what I was making at Safeco. I moved to Los Angeles. My then girlfriend moved to LA also. She went to work for Columbia Pictures. We really liked living in Los Angeles, the sports, the weather, the diversity of people and restaurants was fantastic.
And it takes about a 70% pay raise to move from Seattle to Los Angeles.
It did that, but we got married, and my wife, who's from Bellevue, got pregnant. We decided we would much rather raise a family in Seattle than Los Angeles. So we came up for a Husky football game in the fall of 1988, and my wife is a fanatic dog fan.
Right.
She doesn't miss a game, so we came up for a game, and there was a girlfriend of hers from college that was working at this company called Microsoft. She said, geez, you ought to apply at Microsoft. And her job was, she was the head of stock option administration, so she knew a bit about where Microsoft was going.
Now, just a little parenthetical thing here, because when we say Microsoft now, it creates this picture in our head.
Yeah.
Okay, but back then...
Well, the picture it created in my mind was Microsoft. I worked in as controller of this company called Pitt Printing, and it was publicly traded, and you know, I turned on a PC every day to use Lotus 123, and this C prompt would show up, and you'd get the Microsoft DOS scroll bar, and that's about all I knew about Microsoft.
Yeah.
Well, I said, geez, I should apply, and they sent me an orientation package, which included all the typical human resource orientation material, but it also included their prior year annual report. And I opened it up, and I was like, whoa. Here's this company with $570 million of revenue, about 2,800 employees, with 25% after-tax profit margins, $400 million in cash, and generating cash like crazy.
And so how old were they? 4, 5, 6 years?
At that time, they would have been public for 3 years, and Bill would have started the company about 11 years prior to that.
11 years, okay.
But they had just really gone public. So I came up to interview in this late November of '88, and I was very impressed. First of all, with the all-day process you went through. Secondly, was the IQ and passion of the people that interviewed you. And the third was the rigor of each of the interviews. And what I subsequently learned is the way Microsoft did interviews, the first person would start, and then they would send an email to the next people in the chain saying, hire, no hire, ask him this, I've already covered that. So throughout the day, the interview just got harder and harder and harder. And that was really impressive at how well prepared they were, how passionate they were about getting just the right people. I was fortunate to get hired, and I started January 23rd of 1989.
Wow. How many employees were there at the time?
When I started, there was 2,811, I believe, and the company was about $570 million of revenue.
Huh. And what are they pushing now, about 45,000 employees?
About 60,000 and about $45 billion in revenue.
Huh. It's fascinating to me, your perspective on that interview process, because this is something, as I relate, everything goes through the grid of personal development, and I think about how you liked that. You would thrive on it. And it's interesting to me how successful people, some people would come in there and go, oh, what are all these questions? And it was the toughest thing, you know. But the attitude of, I love this.
Well, I think there's probably a few characteristics that defined Microsoft that really were prevalent in each of the people, and I think it's what they were looking for. I think the first was, are you a person that is optimistic? That is, can you take a question or a set of questions? Can you talk about the things you haven't done well, the things you have done well? But are you the kind of person that's optimistic and always trying to make yourself better? The second thing they really tested for was intellectual dexterity. Could you be asked a question on a topic that you seemingly would know nothing about, but how do you think? Questions like, how many gas stations do you think there are in the United States? Well, who in the heck knows how many gas stations there are besides somebody that works at Chevron or
the
Shell?
Gas Station Association.
Right. But there's a way to analytically think about it that you won't get the answer right, but your thought pattern's very good.
Right.
And then I think the third key thing was the ability for multiple people to be involved in the interview process so that you really get a consensus on that candidate, almost as if it was a family-oriented business, all agreeing that this person should join the family business. all those things about it I really liked.
Does it still operate similarly to that?
It operates similarly. I think the scale it's now at, it probably doesn't have the same quality in every process that it did when it was smaller, but very, very similar process.
Values are still the same, maybe
Absolutely.
different way of exhibiting them. So.
Absolutely.
Good. Well, let's go back because I want to talk a little bit about family and growing up. And I found, as I interview successful people all around the world, that what takes place in that core unit growing up, both good and bad, affects us and what drives us and that type of thing. So you're one of 7 kids, right?
One of 7.
And what place were you in there?
I had 3 older sisters, 2 younger brothers, and a younger sister, so I'm right in the middle.
Right in the middle,
Yeah.
okay. And you know, there's a book called The Birth Order Book, and the middle child is always the one that moves away. According to the Birth Order Book. So the middle child's the one that always goes and...
I validate that.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so what were your other brothers and sisters like? What did you learn growing up? Because you know, most people nowadays, 1 or 2 kids, that's about it. Is there anything from being part of 7 that taught you some things?
I think there were a lot of things you learn. You learn a lot of give and take. You learn to share. You learn not to put yourself first. And you know, with my dad being a teacher at a Catholic school, and my mother worked at the local newspaper, they didn't make a lot of money, and so you had to work to raise money for the things you wanted, and there weren't a lot of material things that were a priority when you had 7 kids. But you know what? It didn't matter a bit. You learned to be a great debater, because every evening at dinner was debate time. You know, my parents loved to talk about different things, whether it was politics or history or sports. So you learn to frame an idea, put it forward, and defend it.
Right, especially defend it.
Yeah, and I had, like I said, 3 older sisters, all of whom were in high school at the same time. And not all high school girls become neurotic for a period of time, but most. And so I had 3 older sisters that used to give me a bad time, but I learned how to put it back to them pretty good. But I think you learn to share. I think you learn to put others first. You learn to advocate a view, at least in our family. And you learn from your parents that family is the single most important thing you'll have in your entire life, whether it's the family you grew up or the family you develop. And that's really held true today for myself as well as my 6 brothers and sisters.
Now, you said your dad was a teacher and a basketball and football coach, right? Did you play for him?
No, he moved from coaching high school when I was going to be a freshman to a community college to avoid coaching me or any of my brothers.
Right. He wanted to keep peace at home, right?
I think he did, and I think that was a good decision.
Yeah.
I think that was a good decision.
What did you learn in sports growing up?
I learned that it's a lot more fun to win than to lose, first. Secondly, I also learned it takes really hard work by the entire team, and it takes great leadership from the captains and or the people that are viewed as the leaders on the team. If you don't work hard, the other team will beat you. But a team that works really hard, that plays really well together, that has great leadership and great discipline, can do incredibly well in any sport.
Yeah.
But I also learned the importance of working cooperatively. And football in particular is that way, where there's a lot of unheralded players, but if any of those players don't do their job, the play doesn't work, or the other team's play will work. And I think I learned teamwork more than anything.
Let's take a 20-second break to thank our sponsor, Made for Success Publishing. For listeners of this show, visit madeforsuccess.com/podcast and enjoy half off of the world's most popular personal development audiobooks. Use coupon code SUCCESS at checkout for a 50% savings. Now, back to the Made for Success podcast show.
So you went from there, you went to University of Montana, and you, again, were going to study law, but then you decided to go into accounting. And what other things took place there at University of Montana? Just average college life, lived in the dorms? And
Yeah, you know, I think it was a really, for me, a great experience. I didn't work that hard at school in high school. You know, I did what it took and got B's and whatnot. But when I went to the University of Montana, I really applied myself and studied really hard and worked hard. There were so many great professors I had. The first year I can remember a great professor named Stuart Justman who taught a course, The Brothers Dostoevsky. And he was so particular about good writing. And I can remember a friend of mine who was in the class going into after hours to tell him, you know, Dr. Justman, I'm having a really hard time writing this paper. You know, it's taken me like an hour to write this half a page. And he said, Justman looked at him and said, sometimes it'll take me 3 days to get a paragraph just right. And it was a lens into the appreciation for what it takes to write really well. And writing really well and succinctly is such a great attribute in life and a great attribute in business. I learned that from him. Secondly, there was a professor named Emmons that taught an Irish history class, and he was the most passionate orator I had ever seen get up in front of people and talk without notes flawlessly for an hour and a half. And that inspired me to become a good speaker. And so subsequent to that, I signed up for Toastmasters, and almost any chance I get, I try to get up and speak. Because being able to communicate well orally it's a great skill, and it's an art. And then moving into the business school, and the accounting school in particular, it's a tough school. And if you go to Montana and study accounting, you're basically expected to pass the CPA exam the first time through.
Oh, really?
And so...
Which most people don't.
Very few people do. The percentages are really low.
Right.
But year in and year out, Montana's in the first top 5 placements in terms of how many people pass the CPA exam first time through. And so that was really a great, difficult, but rigorous academic period. The other thing I loved about Missoula was the outdoors. Whether it's the wilderness areas right around Missoula or Glacier Park or Flathead Lake, there's so much natural beauty and fantastic outdoor opportunities that I like taking advantage of that.
How far was Missoula from home?
It was 500 miles.
Okay.
So my hometown was about the same distance to Denver as it was to Missoula. So it was far enough you couldn't go home on weekends, which was also a plus.
Yeah, I suppose. So you mentioned outdoors, and from the reading that I've done, you are very active and involved in conservation, and particularly grizzly bear. Tell us some of the passion and the love that you came to have for doing work in that arena.
You know, I think probably my passion for the outdoors started from the time I was young. And, you know, for family events, we'd go on picnics or go on hikes, go to the Yellowstone River to fish or float. And so if you're from Montana, you learn to really appreciate the scale of nature and the fact nature's in charge. And there's no large urban areas, and the scale of everything is so big, and the natural beauty is so astounding. I really, from the time I was a little kid, I was fascinated with grizzly bears. And while going to the University of Montana, I began to, you know, any book I could pick up, I'd read about them. And they're magnificent animals. They're, you know, say a North American grizzly outside of Alaska is probably on average about 600 to 650 pounds. They're very smart. They have the muscle density twice that of a human, so they're extraordinarily strong. And they're very fast. A grizzly bear, once it gets running, can run a 40-yard dash in the equivalent of about 2.5 seconds. So they can motor.
Wow.
So the thing about grizzlies is they need a lot of habitat, and they need a lot of forage. So I studied them, I read all about them, and then I got to know the head of the Nature Conservancy of Montana, a guy named Jamie Williams, and got involved in the Nature Conservancy, and we have a big project to protect habitat on the Rocky Mountain front, which is on the east side of Glacier Park, and it's the only place left in the world where grizzly bears will use their native habitat, which is prairie, not mountains, as well as the mountains that they've been kind of forced to move into. So we've got a couple good projects going there, and
So what are you
it's great
doing?
to get out.
What's the projects consist of?
Basically what we're doing is working with local ranchers to get conservation easements so that they do not subdivide and develop the land. So they keep it as either farm or ranch land so that grizzly bears will habitate, particularly in the spring and the fall when they need to get down into the large fens and bogs at the foot of the Rockies to feed. If it's subdivided, those bears will not go back into the fen and the bogs, or they'll have confrontations with humans. And almost any time grizzly bears have confrontations with humans, grizzly bears get killed. So we're trying to preserve a large tract of that land as ranch and farmland so the bears can continue to use it.
Are grizzly bears endangered or near endangerment?
They are not any longer. At one time they were, but they're beginning to have a pretty thriving population in that upper glacier ecosystem. The Yellowstone Park grizzly bears are still endangered, but even that population's growing pretty dramatically.
Now tell me about the rodeo. You are a lover of the rodeo, right?
I love rodeo.
Do you do it, or you like to watch it?
I like to watch it. There was a guy in my high school football team named Buddy Pauley who was a champion bareback rider, and that's when I got introduced to the spirit of rodeo guys.
Yeah.
And as a football player one season, he broke 2 face masks. And I thought, this guy's tough. I better find out what these rodeo guys do.
Right.
And so I began to follow it, and I'm a particular lover of bull riding. And I don't know if you ever watch bull riding.
I've never done it. I've watched it, and I am amazed at how those guys are tough.
Well, they're tough, and the best athlete is the bull.
Yeah.
And these things are incredible. So I love the sport. I'm a big country music fan. And so anytime I can go to professional bull riding competitions, I do. One of the great things to do is go to Las Vegas to the Mandalay and watch the finals.
Oh, yeah.
And the thing is, the bulls almost always win.
Yeah, that's kind of funny. They do the finals in Mandalay, which
Yeah.
is kind of it's way out of context.
It's when you go there, it's you drive the strip or you walk it, and there's not as you can't probably find a bigger contrast than inside that arena and outside.
Yeah. Did you take a ribbing at Microsoft for being a country music, rodeo-loving grizzly bear conservationist?
Occasionally, but surprisingly, there are more rural executives than you would think. Brian Valentine, who's one of the top guys in the Windows development, grew up in Central Washington. He's got a place in Montana. Jeff Rakes was a farm boy from Nebraska. Jim Alchin, who's soon to retire, but one of the head of the platform groups, grew up on a farm in Georgia. Paul Flessner, who's in charge of all the database development and had been in charge of the server and tools business, is an Illinois farm boy. So there's a disproportionate number of leaders that have rural backgrounds at Microsoft. But a lot of the Ivy Leaguers gave us a bad time.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because I'm always fascinated by backgrounds, because backgrounds, and
Absolutely.
I would have never guessed, I don't know if anybody would have ever guessed that list of names that you just listed off.
No, most people wouldn't expect that. And I think it's a little bit unique, but if I look at the number of people I know from rural, the area I grew up, that have gone on to do accomplish things, it's very high.
What do you think it is about a rural upbringing or a farm upbringing that would not be a contrast to working at Microsoft, but actually be the very backbone of creating and running one of the largest companies in the world?
I think it's a couple things. I think it's first of all hard work.
Yeah.
The willingness to do what it takes to get the job done, and knowing that doing your best on every job is just expected.
Yeah.
The final thing I think would be a good dose of humility. If you grow up working in a rural area, farming, ranching, the elements conspire against you on a fairly regular basis, whether it's rain, whether it's commodity prices, any number of things. And you learn to have humility, and you learn about forces larger than yourself, and I think you learn to be pretty humble. Those folks that are at Microsoft that I mentioned exhibit all those characteristics.
Yeah. Tough, and they learn toughness from that upbringing.
Exactly, absolutely.
So tell me the story about the nun. When you were growing up, you had an interaction. I'm sure you had lots of interactions with the nun, but there was one in particular that taught you a life lesson.
Well, I went to Catholic school for a while, so I've got a few.
Okay, so tell me some of your stories from that.
I had a number of nuns as grade school teachers, and the priests and nuns were real actively involved with our family and other families. I had a number of good life lessons from the Sisters of Providence. There's probably 2 or 3 that really stand out. The Sister Verna was a great teacher that I had in 2nd and 3rd grade. Another was Sister Eleanor, was very good. And then there was a Sister Beatrice, who was probably good in that she disciplined me very hard at times when I was probably straying.
Yeah.
And she enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's sort of a caricature of a school teaching nun,
Exactly.
Ruler just waiting.
Exactly.
So good.
Yeah.
What can you remember from, can you remember any different lessons that you learned as you grew up in Catholic school?
I think probably there were a number of things that were really great lessons. The first was the charitable works that the church and the parish really focused on, whether that was helping really poor kids go to school. We would raise money for the kids that couldn't afford the tuition. Secondly, we would go feed people that were home and homebound during the holidays. And then also, I think the focus on good works for those people that had difficult situations in their lives. Say somebody had a father die, or a mother die, or a brother or sister sick. The school pulling together to help those kids and families, and it was just what was expected. And that lesson about do for others that can't do for themselves was just prevalent in the school teaching. It was just something that you grew up thinking that's how the whole world operates.
And it still resides with you today,
Yeah.
a giving heart and wanting to give back and be charitable and help those in need. And it's one of the things I find about most successful people is even when they do get to a place where they have extra money and they're not just hoarding it or keeping it or building empires, even some of those who might be the most ostentatious with it, they still are very generous and giving. And
Absolutely.
So you decided to go into accounting, and for me personally, I find that fascinating because I am not a numbers person at all. I'm a verbal person. I host a talk show. I've written 8 books. I mean, I'm a language
8 books,
person.
that's pretty good.
Yeah, but that's language stuff,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
8 is about as high as I can count, right?
Yeah.
So I got to stop at 10, I guess. But what is it about numbers that I mean, you would have to be fascinated by numbers, I would think, in order to do what you did through your career.
Well, there's probably 2 things that were really interesting about it to me. The first was it was really competitive, and so all the other courses I'd taken, there wasn't the same sort of competition
among students.
And I liked that.
Yeah.
I liked it being tough and a process that weeds out those that don't do well.
Yeah.
Secondly, I had a guy from my hometown who was a prominent lawyer tell me that this accounting, your dad tells me you're studying accounting, that's really a good idea because it's the language of business. And I went back that next semester with a different lens into this accounting, and it was kind of like his words helped me crack the code. And it wasn't like you were learning about numbers, you were learning about this language that's used to facilitate and run business around the world. And I had I think at that point, much more of a business orientation about the use of accounting versus wanting to be a CPA and focus on accounting versus focus on business. But that was just great, insightful advice from that lawyer. It's the language of business. It also was really useful because when I then went to work for Deloitte, I had a good grounding. As I worked at PIP, was working in finance. Joined Microsoft originally in finance, but then as I moved out of finance into other areas, the accounting discipline and the language of business and being able to quickly understand a plan, quickly analyze anything numerically, explain things in a financial way to people, that was a big advantage because you did have the depth of having taken accounting.
And you were being prepared because you were about to enter into a phase of your life where you were dealing with very, very large numbers.
There's a lot of zeros there.
Is there a difference between big numbers and small numbers, or is it just numbers after a while? I mean, did you ever get to the point where you would turn to somebody in a meeting and go, "Oh, that doesn't matter, it's $100 million," and then find yourself going, "Well, I just said $100 million."
Well, it was, while you're at Microsoft, just the scale of things can get lost a little bit.
Yeah.
But in a lot of ways, real tribute to Gates and Ballmer. They've still done a great job of making it run like a small place, and have the accountability and focus of a small place, and run like a business. And in many ways, they still have a lot of attributes of family founders in what they expect, but the scale could be fairly daunting, and I can remember one day coming home and thinking, well, the stock price had moved $1 over X period of time, short period of time. It was after an earnings release, and I was looking at some of the local companies in the Seattle area, and at that time, $1 move in Microsoft stock was worth the entire market cap of Starbucks. Wow. So, when you stopped and looked at it that way, it was like, wow, this is a large scale place.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to the Made for Success podcast. Get to know us at madeforsuccess.com/podcast. Meet the hosts of the Made for Success podcast and pick up a free copy of the Totally Motivated ebook by Chris Widener. We will see you next time on the Made for Success podcast.